Les, thank you so much for being here.
Hey, Christy, always good to be with you. This is going to be fun.
I'm so excited about this. So I have been a fan of yours for a while. I read your books before I got to meet you. We've spoken at Smart Conference for years, and you have this new book that I'm so pumped about. I was just telling you before we went live, Healthy Me, Healthy Us. And Les, I'm like halfway through. I'm loving it. I want you to tell me why you wanted to write this specific book, because you've written a ton of books with your wife, Leslie. Why this book? Why this topic?
Yeah, we've written a lot on, marriage and other relationships, communication books and conflict books and sexuality books and all these kinds of things that are filled with tips and strategies and techniques to improve those areas. But this book is a little different. It really cuts to the core. This book is the hub of the wheel in so many ways, because here's the premise. Your relationships can only be as healthy as you are. Now, let me unpack that just a little bit here. In fact, I'll back up and give you the history. Leslie and I started teaching a class, 25 years ago at a university here in Seattle where we live. And it was a class that was not easy. You can't just start teaching a class. You got to get it approved by the provost and the deans and all that kind of stuff. And so we brought our little proposal for a course we want to teach called Relationships 101. And we had to go through a bunch of hurdles to get that. And finally, they said, okay, you can teach this course, but it'll be, an overload. You won't get paid. If you can find a classroom that's empty at that time, all these little kind of caveats. And so that's all right. And so we found a classroom, 6 p.m. on a Monday evening, had 12 chairs in it. We thought, let's meet then and see if any students will sign up for this pass-fail course on Relationships 101. Well, after about an hour and a half of the first day of registration, the registrar called our office, said, hey, docs, he said, we're going to have to move your classroom. And I said, oh, you need the space for something else? And nobody signed up? He said, no. He said, you didn't cap the course. And I said, what are you talking about? He said, you didn't limit the number of students that could take the course. And I said, what does that have to do with anything? He said, 350 students have registered, and you still have 3 days of registration to go. And doesn't that speak volumes about the hunger and thirst, we have for information on healthy relationships?
Yeah.
And on the very first night of this course, and by the way, so we moved into the auditorium. It's always a packed out class, always a waiting list to get in there with several hundred students. And on the very first night of that class, we always tell them, hey, there's no pop quiz in here. There's no midterm, no final. It doesn't matter to us whether you take any notes. Except tonight, on this very first night, we want you to write down one single sentence. And we tell them this sentence has the potential to revolutionize every relationship you ever attempt to build, whether it's with a friendship, with a roommate, a teammate, a soulmate, doesn't matter. And they all get poised with their pencils or their keyboards, and they're ready to take down this single sentence. And here it is. And this is really the hinge on which this book, Healthy Me, Healthy Us, hangs. Here's the sentence. If you try to build intimacy with another person, if you try to build a connection with another person, before you've done the difficult work of getting whole on your own, all your relationships become an attempt to complete yourself. Let me say that one more time. If you try to build a relationship with somebody else, before you've done the difficult work of getting healthy, of getting whole on your own, all your relationships become an attempt to complete yourself, and they'll fall flat. Guaranteed. Why? Because nobody was designed to complete you. That's the difficult work you have to do on your own. And so because of this sentence, and by the way, I got to tell you before I forget real quick, the last time we taught this course, a student came up to me. This guy came up, and I'm preparing for the next lecture, and I'm at the lectern, and I got my notes and all that, and I'm kind of distracted. He said, hey, Dr. Parrott, can I tell you something? I said, yeah, what is it? He said that last lecture you gave on that single sentence, he said, that was really important to me. I said, oh, that's cool. Thanks for sharing that. He goes, no, it was really important to me. I said, all right. He said, well, can I show you something? I said, yeah, what is it? And I'm still kind of distracted. He said, well, can you look at me? I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, I'll focus on you. And he lifts up his T-shirt, and he had the sentence, he had a tattoo of it on his rib cage.
That's when you've made it, Les, when people are tattooing your quotes on their body.
Isn't that crazy? I wanted to tell him, hey, man, we got a whole semester to go. You might want to wait. I got other good stuff to say, too. But again, it just underscores the idea, and you don't have to tattoo this on your body to get the message, but tattoo it on your cortex, on your brain, and let it seep in there, because your relationships can only be as healthy as you are. If you're depending on somebody else to make you whole, you're going to be disappointed.
I love that. And actually, I highlighted that because it's at the very beginning of your book, and I love how it's in bold. So it's like, the author's letting you know this is important. And I love that because it really, it calls out something in your reader. As I was reading that, I was like, oh, I've done that. Like I felt the weight of that in reading those words. And so I want to unpack that for a minute, even before we move on, because I think what's so cool about this message is, you're calling out in people, hey, all of your efforts to fix people, to improve your relationship by telling them to do more or sound more like this, you're going, hey, look in the mirror. Like it starts with you. So let's unpack that when you're talking about this idea of it's an effort to complete you, and you go into it even in through your path and your framework. What does that look like in a practical way where people, what are some examples where people go, yeah, I've done that, or here's some symptoms of the problem where they can identify, yeah, I've been doing that?
Well, so many times, it's a great question. So many times people look, they've been burned in a previous relationship. They don't want to get burned again. And really at an unconscious level, they look for somebody else that can bring them that kind of healing and make things right, as if that other person can do that, as if it's in their job description. Now you're supposed to do this for me. And of course, that doesn't happen. So we continue to make the same mistakes over and over in relationships if we don't become aware. You've heard me say it a million times from the stage when we're in some city speaking at Smart or something, that awareness is curative. Once you become aware of something, then you can do something about it. And I remember my friend Neil Warren, who co-founded eHarmony, years ago, and that was quite an experience. And I remember one day when things were really taking off, and I said to Neil, in fact, we were in a TV studio, and we were just killing time before things got rolling. And I said, hey, if you could only give one word of advice to a couple before they get married, what would it be? And he didn't have to think about it. It was like on the tip of his tongue. He said, get yourself healthy before you get yourself married. Wow. And that's really what we're talking about. Now, I need to qualify that real quickly, because nobody woke up this morning and went, hey, guess what? I'm totally healthy. Right. I can check it off my list, right? I'm done, right? We're all in process. It's a continuum. But that's what happens in our relationships. We keep looking for this person that's going to make me whole, that's going to be a shortcut to this well-being, and nobody can do that. Like I said, if you're looking for somebody that, you're going to be sorely disappointed and let down.
Yeah, it's such an important thing to realize, and I love that you call it out early on, because then it really it makes you perk up and pay attention. Like, oh, you're right. Okay, now what do I do about that? One of the things you say also in the beginning that I think is really true for a lot of people, and we've actually been talking about this here on the show, is the way you describe it is you say a lot of people come in your office, and counselors hear this all the time. I never knew I had a choice. Why do you think that is? Why do you think people don't realize that they have a choice, that they have more control than they think, that they have this responsibility and opportunity to change things, that they just kind of wander through life they didn't know?
Yeah. They don't. The key word is initiative, right? They aren't taking initiative because they didn't know. Like I thought somebody else was supposed to. I thought the secret was finding the right person, and they forget that the secret is really becoming the right person. And so, I didn't know I had a choice. I grew up in this kind of home, or I suffered this kind of setback, or these things have happened to me, and that's just shaped who I am. And we don't recognize sometimes that no, there's a way. In fact, this book is a roadmap for doing this very thing. There is a way to wholeness. There is a way to emotional, psychological, spiritual well-being and health that is not dependent on anybody else or the right set of circumstances. You create those set of circumstances. And so I'm glad you highlighted that, Christy, because it's so true. You have a choice.
Yeah, I think it's really good too, because it can also, it's an empowering message, but it's also like, oh, I should do something about it message,
right.
Which it's kind of a kick in the pants. And there's several things you write in here which are kind of in that same vein of a little bit of that tough love, and I love it. So you're walking through your framework, and I want you to kind of unpack this. Your first section about profound significance, and you're talking about exploring our self-talk and our past. And here's a few of my favorite things that you wrote. I wrote these down. Here's one line. What you say to yourself is the most important conversation you have all day. And I thought that was really powerful. Healthy people don't let their feelings determine their destiny, and they manage their emotions. You also go on to say pain from our past is overrated. I was like, I just want to do a fist pump from that, because I feel like we're in this culture surrounded by excuses and crutches and, oh, poor me, and feel your feelings and follow your feelings and sit with your feelings and become best friends with your feelings, and on and on and on. And I just love that it's this tough love. I love how you say, you've got to shake off excuses, take responsibility for your current choices, and embrace the freedom you now have to make new ones. And then you also say, what you say and think to yourself becomes what you feel. I love this message. I want you to kind of camp here for a minute in this tough love, this kick in the pants of like, hey, look, you don't have to be a victim to your past circumstances. You don't have to be a victim to your thoughts and feelings. You can actually question them and change them. Unpack this for us, because I think it's so good.
Well, first of all, I got to say, if I can't make my next interview, I'm going to call you to do it for me because, man, you've internalized the message of this book. I love it. This is fantastic. Well, here's the idea. It all begins, this whole journey of well-being and wholeness. And like I said, we're all on a continuum. Nobody arrives. We're all in process. But it all begins for everyone at the same place. It's the same starting line, at least in my opinion. And that is to experience how profoundly significant you are. In the book, we call it profound significance. You've got to experience how profoundly significant you are. And from my worldview, that means in the eyes of God.
That's right.
That God loves you as if you're the only person on the planet to love. And if you're like me and you grew up in the church and you sang, Jesus loves me, this I know, and as you got older, you sang about God's amazing grace, and you might have memorized scripture on, Romans 8 and no condemnation and all the rest. But if you don't experience that, if you don't have a sense of it and you feel that deep down in your bones, it's very difficult to get off the starting line of this whole process, because what I've been hammering home here in the last few minutes is nobody else can do this for you. Ultimately, that's a relationship that you have with your Heavenly Father, in my opinion. And so, yes, you got to tune into the single most important conversation that you ever have. You had it yesterday, you're going to have it tomorrow, you're having it right now. This conversation happens while you sleep. It's 24/7. In fact, imagine if before you fell asleep tonight, Christy, you could take a little computer chip out of the back of your head and you'd slip it in your laptop and it would tabulate your internal dialogue for the last 24 hours. Can you imagine? And it would put it into either one of two buckets, either positive self-talk or negative self-talk. Now, which of those buckets would be most full for you at the end of any given day? If you're like most people, what you would discover on average is that 73% of your self-talk would fall into that negative bucket. And we know this from research at UCLA. So not the person that has a lock on profound significance, right? That person understands, okay, and by the way, this is something you don't earn, you don't achieve, you receive, right? It's all about grace. It's relaxing into that, feeling it deep down in your bones and knowing, in spite of how anybody else treats me, I know that I have profound significance as a human being, as a child of God. Make sense?
I love that. So when you write, when we experience this extravagant love from God all the time, it takes the pressure off our earthly relationships. I love that. So here's my question. What is the healthy balance between loving, like in our marriage, for example, loving our spouse and needing them in a healthy way, and not going into the territory of looking to be completed by them or codependency? Because I was even talking to my husband last night about that. I was like, as I was reading, I was like, kind of processing this with him. I was like, what does that balance look like?
Right. Well, we've been, as Anais Nin says, we've been poisoned by fairy tales, and includes modern fairy tales like "You complete me," that sentiment, and you had me at hello. That somehow this person's going to do that, and what happens is we build what Leslie and I call an A-frame relationship. You have two people symbolized by that letter A that are leaning in on each other, and everybody around them goes, "Oh, isn't that sweet? Isn't that romantic? Isn't that wonderful?" But what happens in a relationship like that is, when you're so dependent on each other for this sense of well-being, is one person stumbles and the whole relationship gives way, right? And what is a healthier way of doing that is to think of it not as an A-frame, but as an M-frame relationship. So you have two people that can stand on their own 2 feet, healthy people, right? And they can stand there, and as iron sharpens iron, we help each other on this pathway towards wholeness, but we just can't count on that other person to do it. But still recognizing, man, you really helped me become a better person. When you're around a healthy person, that's what begins to happen. And so you elevate. There's kind of this progressive this progress that happens that's exponential when you have two people that are healthy together, and we help each other do that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I love that visual. Visuals I think are so helpful for remembering. So that's really helpful. Okay, so we've got through significance. I will resist the urge to ask you more. Let's go into the second section where you talk about authenticity, and I think that's a buzzword, but you unpack it in a really practical way. So kind of walk us through what the steps are within authenticity.
Yeah, once you have your feet planted on this sense of profound significance, the next step in a big, broad way is to get a grasp of or get a lock on what we call unswerving authenticity. And that's being true to you. This is all about your relationship with yourself. The first one is how you relate to God. This second one is how you relate to yourself. And I can't tell you how many times I've had somebody come into our counseling office suffering from that, what we call the proverbial disease to please, right? We're not the only ones that call it that, but that disease to please. And some of us walk around on this planet thinking, oh man, maybe if I accomplish this goal, that group will really, accept me into the fold. Or maybe if I choose this career path, mom and dad would really give me their blessing. Or maybe if I did this thing over here, so-and-so would smile in my direction. And we live our life thinking it's all about winning these people's approval. And that's why that first step is so important, profound, significant, takes a lot of the momentum out of that. But unswerving authenticity is realizing that, hey, in spite of what anybody else says, in spite of what anybody else is whispering behind my back, in spite of what anybody else thinks that is best for me, I know the pathway I've got to follow. This is the path that God has called me to travel. I love what Paul says in Ephesians. He says, get out there on the road God called you to travel. And he says, walk down that road. And then he says, no. Better yet, run. Run down the path God has called you to travel. And that takes a lot of courage, right? To do that in spite of what anybody else is saying, because we're so influenced by that, but not the healthy person. Unswerving authenticity. I remember years ago, Leslie and I were at our publishing house in Grand Rapids, Michigan, Zondervan Publishing House, and this is early on in our career, and we'd written a few books, but we were talking about the next project, and we'd spend all day there with our team and editors and all that kind of thing. And so just to kind of relax and debrief all that, we went out to this Chinese restaurant, and we're all sitting around, and the president of the company there is sitting at the head of the table, and I said, hey, Bruce, I said, man, we've been talking about our stuff all day. What's really exciting to you guys at the publishing house these days? And everybody got so excited, and they're like, tell him, like you could feel it, like it's palpable in the air, like they were really excited. They were just like ecstatic about something. And I said, what is it? They said, well, we just released a book we feel pretty good about. It's called The Purpose-Driven Life. And I said, I didn't even hear the author, Rick Warren, who's a friend, and I didn't even hear the name of the author. I just said, tell me no more. I got the message. That's incredible. Yeah. Who doesn't want a purpose-driven life? That's really a big part of what this unswerving authenticity is about, knowing why on earth am I here, understanding your purpose, and then following that purpose in spite of what anybody else says. That's what profound significance can energize when you get to unswerving authenticity. Make sense?
Yeah, I love that. And then you take that a step further, because you just talked about courage. It takes courage to do that when the current of our world and culture and people's expectations. And then you talk about fear too, and you talk about what that looks like. So kind of unpack kind of that next stage for us.
Well, fear is in the midst of this pandemic that we're all, trying to cope with too. I've thought a lot about this fight or flight response. When we have fear, when we have anxiety, we all know, we've heard that phrase of fight or flight, and our body just reacts that way. Neurochemically we do that. But there's also a third option, and that is to just freeze. Not just to fight, not just to flee, but to freeze. Like, what do I do? And we just get stuck, and I just kind of want to wait until life gets back to normal. And we do the same thing, whether it's a pandemic or not. We do the same thing in our life when fear arrives. It just kind of is almost a stop sign that prevents us from doing anything else, for many of us at least. And so it's detrimental to the whole process of getting whole and getting healthy. And by the way, Christy, I've thought a lot about this in the midst of quarantine conflicts and all this stuff of just trying to find our new normal and everything. Wouldn't you like to come out? Someday the sun's going to shine in a whole new way, And we're going to look back on this and go, that was wild, that was crazy, and the economy. And wouldn't you like to come through that and be healthier as a result of going through it, rather than just sitting around waiting for, the world to change so I can get on with my life again?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's amazing how one of the things you talk about in the beginning is how everybody can experience an event differently. And you used an example of someone on a bus, but I thought, gosh, everybody's experiencing this pandemic differently, and they're going to come out of it differently because of our different perspectives. Okay, let's take this whole thing and apply it to relationships, because the whole first, 2/3 of the book is really about working on you, healthy me, healthy us, and then you talk about kind of applying it now to your relationships through self-giving love, reading your social barometer, and stepping in another's shoes. And I've quoted you, Les, so many times. We were at Smart Conference. You may not even remember this. This was a few years ago, and we were backstage doing our VIP lunch panel, where they just kind of popcorn ask questions to us. And it was a new engaged couple, and they stood up and they asked you a question. They said, what's the number one piece of advice you could give us, as a newly married couple? And you said, empathy. Being able to put yourself in someone else's shoes. I have quoted you so many times and used that in my marriage when I'm frustrated with Matt, or why did he do this, or why did he act this way? I'm like, oh, well, man, I bet I'd be tired if I did this, right? I'd be frustrated if I would. And so that's so powerful. So kind of unpack this last section for us.
Yeah, all right. So you got profound significance, that's your relationship with God. You have unswerving authenticity, that's your relationship with you, being true to you. And that leads you to this third phase in the last third of the book, and that is self-giving love. And this is where life really gets exciting. This is where you begin to love the life you live, because what happens here is you begin to transcend your own boundaries and recognize other people's needs that are unique from yours. I often liken it to wearing mirrored sunglasses, and every adolescent in the world does this, not literally, but figuratively. It's like they're wearing mirrored sunglasses, and they flip the lenses around, and they look out at the world, and all they see is their own neediness, right? And then we progress, as we mature, hopefully, if we don't get stuck there, we get to a place where we flip the lenses back around or take them off and recognize other people's needs in a real genuine way. So you don't walk into a room going, hey, how am I doing? What do people think of me? How's my hair? What about this, that, and the other thing about me? Instead, you can really enter a social setting and go, hey, how are you doing? And really mean it. And that's what self-giving love is. And, I know before this whole pandemic thing, you were on a lot of airplanes just like I was. And I'm always fascinated, if I get on an airplane and people are still boarding, to watch the difference. There's always these two groups of people. There's people that are just like bumbling down the aisle, and I want to get to my place and put my stuff up and all that stuff. And then there's other people that are so conscientious, and they're trying to help other people get their baggage put away and all that kind of thing. And I almost want to say to those people, oh, you got a lock on the last third of this book I just wrote, healthy me, healthy us. But empathy, to get back to your question on that, I wish we could manufacture it. It would be more popular than a bottle of Clorox right now, and sanitizers and everything else. Can you imagine having a spray bottle of empathy sitting on your kitchen table, and you're in the middle of a conversation with a friend, or you're in the middle of a conversation with your spouse, and it's like, man, you need to see the world from my perspective, right? We want to spray that. And probably do the same thing to ourselves. Because I got to tell you, the happiest people on the planet are with somebody that they're experiencing mutual empathy. It doesn't get any better than that. It's the capacity to put ourselves in somebody else's shoes, see the world accurately from their perspective. And the research shows that most of us think we do that better than we actually do. And I'm sure some people that are tuned into us are going, oh, check that. I got that. I'm really good at empathy. And maybe you are, but let me tell you something. I'm a psychologist. I'm a clinical psychologist, and I've written a book called Trading Places that's all about the research on empathy. I did my doctoral dissertation on empathy, and still every day of my life, I feel like I'm climbing up the mountain of empathy. This is a tough thing to get a lock on. And yet when you try, when you're intentional, goes back to that word we talked about earlier, intentional, that's when you see empathy coming into play, and it changes everything.
Yeah, it's so good. I love how practical this is, because I think in the personal growth space, and we're kind of going into that space, I'm starting to experience it myself. It's so hard to articulate the transformation, to articulate the problem, to articulate the promise and what's possible for people in a way that actually compels them to do something about it, to change their life, to change their habits. And you do that in such a great way, Les. It's such a great book. I can't recommend it enough. Tell people where they can find it and get the assessment and get the book.
Well, Christy, you are so kind. Thank you so much. And I know you well enough to know you're genuine right now when you say that too. So that's even better. So thank you. So folks can find out more about this. The book is called Healthy Me, Healthy Us. You can go to the website by the same title, healthymehealthyus.com, and you can take that little questionnaire on your self-talk if you want to there and learn more about the whole project. Our other website is lessonleslie.com, and obviously my wife and I wrote this book together, Healthy Me, Healthy Us. Your relationships are only as healthy as you are. Christy, it's so fun to be with you doing this.
Oh my gosh, Les, I'm just so grateful. Thanks for your friendship, thanks for being here, and thanks for this awesome book. Thanks for spending some time with us.
Absolutely.